Hello and welcome back to the channel. In today's episode, we are going to go ahead and cover how to enhance the visual aspects of the game we have been working on called the Battleship. So let's go ahead and take a look at a couple of things that we can do. And what I want to do is actually share with you guys a bunch of really cool stuff that you can actually download from the Unity Asset Store. And one of the primary things that we are going to add to our scene is going to be a terrain. And luckily, Unity has provided a really nice terrain package that will provide a bunch of really nice assets that we can utilize to enhance the visual aspects of our level. So let's go ahead and see how we can actually do this in a rather quick time. Good. So now we are back in Unity and let's take a quick look and see how the new terrain assets are going to enhance the visual aspects of our level. And also notice that we have added a really nice shader graph shader that will be used to render pretty much water effects for us. Okay, so let's take a look at the actual assets that have been used and how they have been incorporated into this particular design in the scene. So let me go ahead and switch over to where we can get the assets from and how to download them. Okay, so here I'm going to bring up the package manager, and inside the package manager, we are going to take a look at a few packages that you might want to consider installing and upgrading. In fact, I actually do recommend these packages because they do provide you with really nice texture materials where you can apply the textures to your terrain and also textures for the brush types where you can actually utilize the brush textures to modify the height of the train and the height map of the train. So whether you want to lower it, reduce the height, or increase the height, and etc., this train tools package will provide you with a bunch of really nice assets. So I recommend you guys to go ahead and install and download and install the train tools from the Unity registry. And once you actually install this, you can actually go ahead and also download two other assets from the asset store. One of them is the samples package, and the other one is the URP demo scene package. Both of these are recommended for you guys to download and just play around with. They do provide, again, a lot of really nice assets, whether there are models for the vegetation, the trees, the textures for the trees, and etc. And you also get some really nice shaders that come along with them that make the visuals of your landscape pretty easy. I'm going to go ahead and switch over to the web site where you can actually visualize these assets better. All right, so over here you would notice that I have brought up the documentations for the terrain tool, and depending on which version of Unity you are on, your package for the terrain tool might be different, the version might be different, but pretty much it's the same. So it does provide you with a really nice improved workflow for creating terrain ecosystems in Unity. And again, all of these vegetations and assets you see is included in this package. So if you're an indie developer or if you're a programmer and you don't have a lot of uh, ability to create a lot of 3D assets or models, then this particular train tool and utility will provide you with some of the basics that will help you get started. And over the course of the project, you might want to incorporate some other uh, additional assets, or maybe you want to hire someone else to create the actual 3D models for you. So I highly recommend you guys to download this train tools. And once you download these tools from within Unity, you can also download the Unity Train URP demo scene. Again, let's go ahead and just play this and see how this looks. And you would notice that this particular uh, demo out of the box, they provide you with some really nice assets again, like this grasses over here, the trees, different types of trees, different types of rocks. More importantly, It's the textures. The textures are what are important in enhancing the visuals of any of the graphics. So this tool set and this demo scene actually provides you with a really, really nice set of textures where you can utilize and apply to your trains. Okay, so that's the background. So now let's go ahead and go back into Unity and uh, see how we actually incorporated all of these things together into our own scene. Okay, so now we are back in Unity, and what I want to do is actually explain to you guys how the environment portion of the scene has been put together, and what I think would be best is for me to actually hide what you see currently, and then show you guys how to create a new terrain and how to apply some of the terrain tools to make it look the way we have it over here in the scene. And hopefully that will give you guys a good understanding of how to utilize the tools and how easy it is to actually put all of these things together in a rather quick time. So I'm going to go ahead and show you guys the following. So here we have the environment, and we have everything related to the environment under this particular um, game object. So I have my train itself over here. So as soon as you select the train, you would notice that we have the train tools. This is basically what you would get with that particular asset. It makes life easier. And then more importantly, on this side, if you go over to the train tabs, you would see that now you have a bunch of really nice brush types over here. These brush types are basically specific textures that can be utilized for increasing or decreasing the height, or even how to apply specific textures onto the train based on the brush itself, the textures that's being applied to the brush itself. Okay, so that's the train. I have uh, I have a bunch of rocks over here as well. So some of the rocks are super small and some of the rocks are kind of large. These rocks also are coming part of that asset. They do have an important aesthetics. So they do actually make it look really nice. You notice that also it comes with a very nice shader that gives you the ability to actually render some of this green area based on the direction of the light and how it's interacting with the light and how vegetation can grow in such an environment. And finally, we have a collection of trees. So I have grouped them together, and these are some of the other assets that are coming from that particular uh, scene, the URP demo scene that you have. So I have collected them over here. And finally, I have incorporated a wind zone, and the wind zone is basically going to uh, provide some forces that can interact with the vegetations in the scene on the train, and that will give the actual movement of the vegetations and the trees, as you see over here in the scene view, much nicer. So let's go ahead and actually disable everything that you see, and I'll show you guys how to quickly generate what we have over here, basically, right? So I'm going to go ahead and just disable all of those guys. So we are back to our plane, and this is the water plane over here, and probably I'll do another episode just covering the water, right? So we'll get to the water portion at a different time. So I'm going to go ahead and disable this as well. And what I want to do over here is just click run. And when you click run, we get our boards the way we did previously. And this gives us a clue of where we are going to eventually place all of the train objects and any other objects, right? So let's go ahead and see how we can do that. So first things first, what we want to do is create a new terrain object. So we can go to 3D objects, and from here we can select terrain. And by default, Unity generates an extremely large terrain. So select that particular game object representing the terrain and switch over to the first tab, or I'm sorry, to the last tab. And from the last tab, you would see a bunch of properties here that you can modify. In this particular case, what we want to do is just play around with the width and the length of the train, as well as the actual height of the train. This will give us some actual control on the dimensions. So what I'm going to do is actually go back to the train that I have already created to extract this information. So let's go over here. So the train width is going to be 30 meters by 30 meters, the width and length, and the height we are going to set it to 5. Okay. And the reason we are going to do this is because it's going to make it much nicer as far as our dimensions are concerned within the scale that we have in our level. So let's go ahead and quickly change this to 30 by 30, and let's change this to 5. And let's go ahead and also uh, readjust this. So it's going to be in the center for us. So let's go ahead over here and let's see over here. So 30, 35, and we want to locate it at -5 and -10 on the X and the Z axis. This will displace it for us based on where the actual board is going to eventually be. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. So let's move the newly generated train to -5 and -10. Currently, this is at 0, 0, 0. And we know that whenever we generate the boards are going to start at 0, 0, but then we have 10 units, a gap plus another 10 units. So let's go ahead and displace this accordingly. So it would be centered to that particular location. And before we do anything, let's go ahead and click on play one more time. And probably we have to also make an adjustment on the y-axis as well. Okay, there we go. So it looks like our terrain object is nicely centered uh, as far as our board is concerned. And our board is sitting a little above the 0 elevation, and our terrain is exactly at 0. So we might want to actually move this down a little bit later, a little bit below the 0. In that way, when we put the water plane on top of it, there is some depth, and the depth is going to be used later on by the shader to actually outline the light versus the dark, rendering of the color of the water based on how deep the water is when it's actually interacting with the terrain itself. Okay, so let's go ahead and stop this for a second. And let's move this down to, I believe it was -0.6. All right, so now that we have our terrain in our scene, the next thing we want to do is actually move over to the first tab. And from the first tab, there's a drop down over here. The drop down will allow you to perform a bunch of different types of operations on the train. And each one of these operations is going to perform obviously a specific type of feature on top of it. So in this particular case, we are going to be concentrating on paint texture and raise and lower the train. So let's go ahead and first switch over to paint texture. And when we switch over to paint texture, this will allow us to actually paint the different types of textures we want on the train, and each texture is going to have its own layers. Now, the cool thing about that asset that we imported is that it already has like a layer palette profile that we can utilize, or you can create your own, by the way, right? So you can create your own layer palette profile. You just click on add layer, and then you select the specific texture that you want to apply to the train. You assign that, and once it's assigned, then we can apply that particular texture to the train. In our case, what we are going to do is utilize the train demo palette, and then it's going to give us a warning as far as, okay, we might have something already there, so it will overwrite it, so you gotta be careful. So in this case, ours is empty, so we're gonna just say it's fine, okay. And what it'll do is that it'll give us basically all of these textures out of the box, right? So as you can see, immediately we actually have something that looks pretty cool. So that's one of the cool things that we can do. The next cool thing that we want to do is actually go over to the rising and lowering of the train. And this tool basically over here, it tells you you can increase or decrease the height of the train. And if we just do a left click right now, by default, it's going to increase it. If we hold the control key and then click on the left button, it's going to do the opposite. It's going to decrease it. So from here, you can play around and see which one of these brush types you would want to utilize. In my case, I have been using the following one, right? So you can actually go through each one of these things. And basically, this is kind of like a height map, right? So depending on the brush type and when you apply that onto the terrain, the height of the train will be elevated or de-elevated based on the stroke that you have on the brush. So let's go ahead and change it to this. Down here, you have the ability to change the strength of the brush and the size of the brush. So you can increase or decrease the size of the brush. So let's say if you want to apply a larger area, or in our case, again, due to our scale, we want to go down to 2. Maybe we can increase this to like 10 or something later. And the actual strength, like how powerful you want this to be applied. So I'm going to quickly show you what this does. And then afterwards, I'll show you a couple of other things that I did to generate the other train that I have. So that's kind of large. Let's go ahead and change this to, let's say, 5. So I can apply this quickly. So you can see that, oops, you gotta make sure that you don't get out of. So this will actually raise the terrain. And one really cool thing to be aware of is that right now we kind of have an idea of the edges of the train, and the edges of the train are going to be away from the actual board. And the reason we have, if you recall, we applied like a height of 5 as far as the elevation of the train is concerned, because if you have it higher than that, in this particular case, you might suddenly have a really sharp edge going out, right? So it's not going to look really nice. So let's go ahead and just do a quick elevation from the sides over here. And in my case, what the next thing I did is that I kind of subdivided the train into 2 parts based on where the boards are going to be placed. The way I approach that is that I actually run the uh, the game, and once we have the actual board, so notice that over here we can actually, this is a better way of like modifying your terrain. And one of the cool things about the terrain data is that whatever you do at runtime, it actually stays in memory, so it doesn't, you don't actually lose it. So let's go ahead and quickly, just for show you guys how that can be done. So very quickly you can do this. But this gives us a rough outline. And over here, notice that the brush size, the 5 is kind of too large. So I change it to 2. And I kind of have a line going through here. And then once we have this kind of ready to go, now we can actually stop the game. We kind of have an outline of the train, but there's a lot of work that, generally speaking, you would do here, right? So now, basically, what you're going to do is probably also go ahead and try to utilize the smooth height. And for smooth height, um, I change the brush to one that looks like this, and I quickly go over all of the elevations. This gives it a nice smooth height from the actual mesh that has been generated. And I keep on doing this, going back and forth between play and design time to make sure that the board is not uh, covered totally, right? Because we want to make sure that, all of these board units are going to be visible, they're not hidden, and basically we also don't have any gaps the way we have it over here, right? So in order for us to do that, again, going back to the raising and lowering of that, and I'm going to use the control click to kind of, clean these particular areas over here, and also on this side. Oops. So this part of the design is kind of time consuming, but you gotta have patience, and you do have to have some uh, vision as far as how you want to incorporate that in there. Okay, so this is pretty much an easy way to uh, create and generate the actual height map for the terrain. So I'm not going to go through this because, again, it does take quite a bit of time to kind of polish this up and etc. And I've already done so over here. The next thing I do want to showcase to you guys is how easy it is to place trees. So if you go ahead and click on the third tab, it's called painting the trees. And from here, there's this option called edit trees. If you click on that and say add tree, and from here, you can select a particular prefab for tree placement. And in our case, I have actually utilized uh, conifer. Gonna say add. And over here, you also have to be careful. So if we go ahead and first of all, let's go ahead and change the brush size to something that's more relevant to our scale. So if I go ahead and click on that, you would notice that it actually does place a tree, but the scale of the tree is super large in relation to our terrain. To remove this tree, you hold down the control key and click on the area where the tree was placed, and you can go ahead and remove it. So there's a bunch of settings over here you want to be kind of getting familiar with. One of them is this tree height. So the tree height for us, we can go ahead and adjust it to make it lower. Again, this is something you have to play around with to see which one makes sense as far as your scene is concerned, and also the density, like the density of the placement of the trees onto the terrain, right? So we can adjust that too. It is kind of pretty full. Actually, we can check it out. So in this case, if you do it like that, now this tree scales as far as the height of the tree is much better, right? It's much more relevant to our scale of the ships eventually that you're going to place on top of it, as well as the actual elevation of the tree. So you can go ahead and play around with the tree density placement. I usually like to keep it around like 40 or something. And the height in my particular case, again, it's going to be in this particular random range. You can increase and decrease the mean and the max on that. So let's go ahead and just place a few of these trees randomly onto the terrain. So pretty nice, pretty cool. Similarly, we can go ahead and say add tree again. And this time we can select maybe a brush. This was a fern that I used. So notice that, let's zoom in, right? So as you're placing the vegetation, things are becoming a little more nice and interesting. So you can go ahead and continuously go ahead and do this. And of course, similarly, you're going to get some ferns or vegetations that are going to poke through the board. In those cases, you want to clean those up. You can go ahead and clean them up. All right. And let's go ahead and add some uh, grass. So this trees, it just says trees, but technically speaking, you can apply any type of a prefab. So if you have a specific prefab that you want to place onto the train, it doesn't necessarily have to be a tree. You can have a rock if you want to randomly generate rocks and brush them and paint them over the train. You can also utilize that. So you can use this paint tree function to actually randomly place a bunch of prefabs of different types, right? So let's go ahead and select this one, the bush red, give it some nice, right, there we go. So we get some color. Anyway, so you have to play around with this to see which one would work better for you. In fact, let's go ahead and remove this one. So let's see if you don't like this one. I think I'm going to go ahead and remove this from the scene. You can go remove three, and that will actually remove it. Let's go ahead and add a different one. Let's go ahead and add some grass or dry bush. Okay, so you get the idea. So you can actually paint and do a bunch of really cool things over there. The last thing that I did was actually add some sort of a rock. So let's go ahead and get some of the rocks that we get from the asset. So let's go ahead and select this one. Yeah, similarly, you'll have to play around with the tool. There we go. So over here, again, I'm not sure exactly how Unity handles the placement of the objects, but if an area is already pretty dense, for example, in this area, there's a lot of dense, you may or may not be able to play the rocks. In this case, it did actually. So take a look at them. If you keep the scale the same, it works pretty nice. You can also manually bring in some of the models yourself. So in my case, what I did is bring in the pines, and I believe I used pine A. Yes, these are nice. So I went ahead and put the pine. This is the actual scale of the pine. So what I did is I reduced it to 0.1, 0.1, 0.1. And this is much more suited as far as the scale is concerned for my scene. And basically what I've done once I placed these guys individually, I just duplicated them and moved them around into a grouping to my liking. So basically that's what I did. This is how you would generate the actual train. The best thing is for you guys to download those toolkits and the actual demo scene, study it, observe it. More importantly, what you're going to take away from them is all of these assets that are already freely provided to you. These are great assets, by the way. So you can utilize them to enhance your levels design rather quickly and simply. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and hide this train that we just put together. And I'm going to also remove these pines. And I'm going to bring back the train and the rocks that I worked on. And this is the actual result, right? So similar, it's pretty much the same concept. In this particular case, I didn't get too close to the actual boards. The reason I didn't do that is because eventually the water plane is going to cover that. So you're not going to see that empty space over there, right? So this is another thing you have to take into consideration, right? So you have to have kind of like a plan of how you're going to put these things together. So in my particular case, I was able to kind of just dig out kind of like this pond area, this lake area, right, where the board is going to be on top of the surface. I have a couple of other bigger rocks over here to give it a nice look, even though you'll never see this in the camera the way the camera is, but in the future, you never know. Then I placed individual rocks over here. These are all manually placed, so you can take a look at, the rock types. And I pretty much what I've done is that I collected all the rocks under its own grouping that I individually placed. Similarly, I have individually placed the trees and I group them together, so it's not easy to maintain them. And then I have the train itself, where it has the other vegetations basically painted over, right? So all of the other trees, with the exception of the pine trees, have been painted on top of it, and this border kind of gives me a nice division on the train. And once we apply the water plane, you see that it's coming out pretty nicely. So hopefully this gives you a good understanding of how to play around with the train tool. Again, it would take some time for you guys to study the tool if you haven't used it before, to kind of get to know it. And once you have a good understanding of it, then you'll know how to utilize the different types of brushes, and the different types of textures you want to paint over it, the layers, different types of layers, and of course, how to place objects onto it. All right, so that's it for this episode. Hopefully, you guys had a good overview of the train and the train tools. And with that, you would be able to apply some of the concepts that we have seen and creating a much nicer level for yourselves and with vegetations and etc. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and see you guys in the next episode. Have a good one. Bye bye.